by saying that if you want an answer at the end, prepare to be disappointed. There isn't one, and I don't think there ever will be. I was an intern at Nickelodeon Studios for a year back in 2005 for my 8th degree in animation. I wasn't paid, of course, but most internships aren't. And it did have some perks beyond education, though. To adults, it might not seem a big one, but most kids at the time, they probably shit themselves over it. Since I worked directly with the editors and animators, I got to view new episodes of cartoons days before they were aired. I'll get right to the point without getting too unnecessary details. They have very recently made a SpongeBob movie, and the entire staff was somewhat sapped for creativity. This took them a little longer to start up a new season, sure, but the delay actually lasted longer for more upsetting reasons related to the season 4 premiere. The 2 interns and I were in the editing room, along with the lead animators and sound editors for the final cut. We received a copy that was supposed to be Fear for Krabby Patty, and gathered around the screen to watch. Now, given that everything is finalized at that point, animators often put up mocking title cards as a joke, and with phony, all-time Lou titles like How Sex Doesn't Work instead of Rockabye Believe. The episode where SpongeBob and Patrick adult of sea scallop. There's nothing particularly funny except for the few work-related chuckles. When we saw the title card, Squidward Suicide, we didn't think it was any more of a joke. But if the entrance did a small throat laugh at it, the happy-go-lucky music played as normal. The story began as many of them do. Squidward playing his clarinet, hitting a few sour notes like usual. We hear SpongeBob laughing outside, and Squidward stops, "Bye!" yelling at them to keep it down. He mentioned something about a concert that he needed practice for. SpongeBob complies and goes to see Sandy with Patrick. The bubble splash screen comes up, and it has cut to the ending of Squidward's concert. This is where it seems to get off in a bad way. While playing, a few frames repeat themselves, and the sound doesn't. At this point, the sound finishes as if the skip never happened to. There was a slight murmur in the crowd before everyone begins to boom. It's mostly the normal cartoon boo that's someone in the show. You can hear malice in it. Squidward, with his was in full promenade, looked visibly afraid. The shot cut to the crowd with SpongeBob in the center frame. He too was booing, which very unlike him. However, that wasn't the oddest thing. The oddest thing was that everyone had hyper-realistic eyes. They weren't detailed. They weren't shots of real people's eyes, but something a bit more real than CGI. The pupils were red too. Some of us looked at each other, obviously confused. But since we weren't the writers, we didn't question appeal to children yet. The shot cuts to Squidward as he sat on the edge of his bed, looking for them. The view out of his porthole window was of a night sky, so it appeared it wasn't very long after the concert. At this point, there was no sound. There was literally no sound. There weren't even feedback from the speakers in the room, as if the speakers were turned off. Though there was the static showed them they were working perfectly. Squidward simply sat there, blinking, in this silence for about 30 seconds until he began to sob Sally. Sorry guys. He put his tentacles over his eyes and cried quietly for a full minute more. All the while, a sound in the background slowly growing from nothing to barely audible. It sounded like a slight breeze flew forest. The screen slowly began to zoom in his face. By slowly, I mean, it was only noticeable as you look at the shots tense apart side by side. His sobbing got louder and louder, more full of hurt and anger. The screen twitched for a split second, as if it twisted on itself before running to normal. The wind through the trees sound slowly got louder and louder, more severe too, as if a storm was brewing somewhere. The eerie part was the sound, and Squidward sobbing sounded real. As if the sound wasn't coming from the speakers. As if the speakers were holes the sound was coming through from the other side. As good quality as studios like to have, they don't purchase the equipment to be good to produce sound of that quality. Below the sound of the wind and sobbing was something that sounded like faint laughing. It came at odd intervals and never lasted more than a second, so you had to have a hard time pinning it. After 30 seconds of this, the screen blurred and twitched violently, as something flashed over the screen like a subliminal image. The lead animator editor paused and rewound frame to frame. What we saw was horrible. It was a still photo of a dead child. It could have been more than 6 years old. His face was mangled and bloodied. One eye was popping out and dangling over his upturned face. He was naked down to his underwear, and his stomach was brutally cut open with his internals lying beside him. He was lying on some pavement. The most upsetting part was there was a shadow of a photographer visible. There was no crime tape, no evidence bags or markers, and the angle was completely off for a shot designed to be evidence. It would seem the photographer was the person responsible for the child's death. We were, of course, mortified. However, we pressed on, hoping it was a sick joke. The screen flicked back to Squidward, still sobbing. He was louder than before, and only half of his body was in the frame. Then there was no what appeared to be blood rolling down his face from his eyes. The blood was also done in hyper-realistic style. As looked as if you could touch it. You'll get blood on the fingers. The line sounded as if there was a gale blowing through a forest. There were even snapping sounds of branches. The laughing, a deep baritone, lasted longer and came more frequently. After about 20 seconds, the screen again twisted and showed another single-frame photo. The editor was reluctant to go back, as if we all were, but we knew he had to. This time, the photo was that of what appeared to be a little girl, no older than the first child. She was lying on her stomach, her berets on the pool of blood next to her. Her left eye, too, was popped out as if she was naked, except for underpants. Her internals were piled on top of her, above a crude cut around her back. Again, the body on the street was the photographer's shadow was visible, and it was very similar in shape and size to the first. I had to choke back vomit, and one intern, the only female in the room, ran out. The show resumed about 5 seconds after this second photo. All sound stopped like it was when the scene started. Squidward put his tentacles down and his eyes were done in a hyper-realistic style, like the others in the beginning of the episode. They were bleeding, bloodshot, and pulsating. He stared at the screen, as if watching the viewer. After 10 seconds, he started sobbing. This time, he wasn't covering his eyes at all. The sound was piercing and loud. The most fear-inducing part of all that was the sobbing. It was mixing with screams. Tears of blood was dripping down Squidward's face at a heavy rate. The wind sound came back as so did a deep voice laughing. The next still photo lasted for a good 5 frames. The enemy was able to stop on the 4th and backed up. This time, this was a full photo was of a boy, about the same age as another children. But the scene was different. The entrails was just being pulled out from his stomach wound by a large hand. The boy's right eye was popped and dangling, with blood trickling down it. The animator proceeded. The next was different, though we couldn't tell how. He went to the next after that, and it was the same thing. He went back to the first and played them quicker. I lost it, vomiting on the floor. The animating and sound editors were gasping at the screen. The file frames, not if there were 5 different photos. They were played out as if those frames were from a video. We saw the hand slowly lift out the guts, and we saw that the kid's eye focusing on it. And we even saw 2 frames of him beginning to blink. The leading sound editor told us to stop. He had to call in the creator to see it. Mr. Hellenberg arrived within 15 minutes. He was confused as to why he was called here, so the editor continued the episode. Once the few frames were shown, and all sound again stopped, Squidward was staring at the viewer, his entire face in the frame for about 3 seconds. The shot apparently quicked out with the deep voice saying, "Do it!" The next thing was that we see a shotgun in Squidward's hands. He immediately pulls the gun into his mouth and pulls the trigger. Realistic blood and bloody matter splatter the wall and bed behind him. He flies back from the forest. The last 5 seconds of the episode showed his body on the bed, on his side, with one eye dangling on what's left of his head above the floor, staring blankly at it. The episode ends there. Mr. Hellenberg was obviously angry about it. He demanded to know what the hell was going on. Most people left the room at that point, so it was just a handful of us to watch it again. Viewing the episode twice only served to imprint the eternity of it to my mind and caused me horrible nightmares. Sorry I stayed. One theory we could think is it was someone in the chain of the drawing studio to here edited the file. The CTO was called to analyze what happened. The analysis of the file did not show was edited over by new material. However, the timestamp of it happening was a mere 24 seconds before we began viewing it. All equipment involved was examined for foreign software and hardware, as well as glitches, as if the timestamp may have glitched and showed the wrong time. But everything checked out fine. We don't know what happened, and to this day, no one does. There was a police investigation due to the nature of the photos, but nothing came of it. No child was identified, no clues were gathered from the data involved or physical clues in the photos. I never believed in unexplainable phenomena before. Now I've seen it for myself. Something happens, and I can't prove anything about it beyond if something happens, and I can't prove anything about it beyond anecdotal evidence, I think twice about things.